This video, I will go over the sine graph and how to properly graph a sine graph. So we're going to learn about how to graph a sine graph. So on the right, on the image on the right, you have a sine graph, and I just want to point out a few things. It looks like a wave. It is a wave, but more specifically, notice that the sine graph goes through the origin, right? And then you have these x coordinates. These are called your critical values, right? Pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, right? They're all critical values. And on the y-axis, notice your max is 1 and your minimum is -1. So you have a max here. So on a sine graph, it goes through the origin, and then it goes to the max. And then it actually goes to the midway, which is 0. And then down here, it never goes below -1. So that's a key important to knowing to graph a sine, because it's just a cycle. Max, midway, min, and then your period. And then there's other stuff we have to learn about when graphing the sine graph, but I'll go over it. So yeah, this is a sine graph. If you need to copy it down, go ahead and press pause. We'll talk about all the characteristics of a sine graph. Okay, let's talk about the characteristics of a sine graph. So this is okay, so characteristics of sine graph. It has a period or one cycle of 2 pi. So what do they mean by period or 2 pi? So as you can see over here, this is one cycle. So what that means is it just, see how it started at 0, so it's going to end at 0. So that's how you know you have one completed cycle. Actually, should be 2 cycles. No, this is one cycle. So it started at 0, went to the max, midway, and then minimum, and then 0 again. So that's how you know you have a cycle. And I will explain how to get the period. It has a max, so if it doesn't have a vertical shift, your max is 1. So we're talking about the parent graph. So, and then it has a midway of 0. So midway, I like to think of it as the halfway point. Oh, yeah, the halfway point between the max and min. So yeah, it's midway, and then your minimum is -1. So yeah, midway is like the average between the max and min. So that's how I think of it. Okay, and then it has the critical value. So I kind of explained it on the first slide. It's all your x coordinates. This, 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 and that. So basically, if you know those things, you can easily graph a sine graph. Doesn't matter if it's the parent graph or where it has horizontal shift, vertical shift, reflection. Okay, so let's talk about shift, reflection, translation of a sine graph. So just like any parent graph, a sine graph can have shift, reflection, and translation. So the equation y equals a sine times bx plus d. The a value represents the amplitude, so that really helps with the your max and min. It can also represent a reflection if it's negative. Okay. The bx minus c represents a horizontal shift, and then the d represents the vertical shift. So if you have a vertical shift, your max and min is no longer just going to be the a. You kind of have to combine them, and I will explain when we do the example. Okay, so yeah, let's move on. So let's talk about the critical values. So yeah, so critical values are the x value of the coordinates. So if you go back to the even if you went back to this graph right here, these are all your x values. So these are all your critical values, right? Those are all your critical values. So how do you find those critical values? It's pretty simple. Usually you have 4 critical values within one cycle, right? So yeah, if you have, usually a cycle is like 2 pi, so you have 4 cycles. You have 5 critical values if you have a horizontal shift for one cycle. And then to find the critical values, you simply take the period divided by 4. So it's just the period divided by 4. I don't think I've talked about the period, but I think that's going to be in the next slide. The period is 2 pi over b. And I will explain that. So yeah, that's how you find your critical value. If you have a horizontal shift, what you do is first find the horizontal shift, and then you do this formula, and then you add that, whatever that term is. So once you do period over 4, whatever that term is, you add it to the you add it to each value. Okay, so yeah, just like I said, if you have a horizontal shift, start with the horizontal shift first, then do the period over 4. So let's start with number 1. Find the critical values of the graph. So on number 1, let's find the critical values. So it doesn't say to graph it, we just got to find your critical values. So those are all the x values. Let's just start with one cycle. So how do you find it? It's just the period divided by 4. So what is our period? The period is 2 pi over b. And then the b value is the number in front of x. So in our case, our b value will be 1 because there's no number in front of x, right? Okay, so our period is 2 pi. So it's going to be 2 pi over 4, which can be reduced by 2. So that would be pi over 2, okay? So what that means is you start at pi over 2, right? Your first x value will be pi over 2. And then you keep on adding pi over 2 until you stop at 2, your period, 2 pi, right? So what's pi over 2 plus pi over 2? 2 pi over 2, which is pi, right? And then pi plus pi over 2. That would be 2 pi plus 1 pi. That's 3 pi over 2. And then you keep on adding pi over 2. That's 4 pi over 2, which is 2 pi. Okay, so see how we have 4 critical values? Yeah, that's how you find your critical values for one cycle. Okay, so let's do example 2. We have y equals 2 sin of x minus 2. So this one we have what's called a horizontal shift because bx minus c. So what's your horizontal shift? Some people can see that it's just 2 units to the right. So how did I find that? You simply set the parentheses to 0 and solve for x, right? Okay, so according to the lecture, it says if we have a horizontal shift, we'll have like 5 critical values within one cycle. Okay, so the next thing I would do is find the period. And then you divide that by 4. So what is my period? My period is 2 pi over b. Wait, so first let me find the period. So it's 2 pi over b. Our b value is 1, so it's 2 pi. And then to find the period to find the critical values, or yeah, you do the period, which is 2 pi divided by 4, which can be reduced by 2, so that would be pi over 2. So what you do is you start at your phase shifts. In our case, ours is 2, and then you just keep on adding pi over 2. Right? And then your last point will be the phase shift plus the period. So whatever your, all right, we said our phase shift is 2 plus our period, which is 2 pi. So this would be your last term, which would technically be a decimal. So, but you can leave it like that. Okay, so now you know how to find the critical values when you have a regular sine graph with no phase shift and with a phase shift. Okay, let's move on. So finding the period, I think I should have done this slide first. To find the period, basically you do the period equals 2 pi over b, and b is the value in front of the x. So yeah, the b value is the number in front of x. So this says find the period of the graph y equals 3 sin of 2x minus 6 plus 2. So the period is 2 pi over b. So the b value is the number in front of x. So in our case, it would be 2. So it'd be pi. So the period is pi. Okay, so that is our period. Let's move on. Okay, to find the phase shift, you simply set bx minus c equals to 0. So it's whatever that parentheses you have, set it to 0 and solve for x. So let's look at an example. We have two examples, find the phase shift. So to find the phase shift, you set whatever your parentheses. So number 1, it would be 2x minus 6. Set it to 0 and then solve for x. So x equals 3. So your phase shift is going to be at 3. So you start at 3, right? The same thing here. Your phase shift is whatever your parentheses. Set it to 0, solve for x. Okay? So that's how you find your phase shift. The next thing you have to find in order to graph a sine graph is finding the max and min. So you can easily find the max and min by finding the amplitude. If you have a vertical shift, add it to your max and min value. So what do you mean by that? I will explain. So we have two examples. The direction says find the min and max and min of the graphs because that is a very important key to graphing. So on number 1, do we have a D? Do we have a vertical shift? No, we don't. So that actually makes your life easier. So your max is, the amplitude is absolute value 3, which is, absolute value 3 is 3, negative 3. So what that means is your max is at 3, and then your min is at negative 3, right? And then just for curiosity, midway is the average of the max and the min. So your max is 3, and then your plus your min is negative 3 divided by 2, which is 0. And then number 2 states find the max and min. So your max is, so do we have a vertical shift? Yes, we do. We have it at negative 4, right? So your max is 2, but then you add it with your vertical shift. So your vertical shift is -4. So put them together. What's 2 minus 2 plus -4 is -2. So your max is -2. And then your min, so it's like the absolute value 2, which is -2, plus your vertical shift, which is -6. Okay, so your max is -2, and then your min is -6. Okay. Okay, good. Okay, so midway, I think I did this on the previous slide. The midway is just of the sine graph is the average between the max and min. So let's look at one. Number 1 says find the midway of the graph. So in order to find the midway, you got to find your max and min. So your max, since there is a vertical shift, there's a -3. So your max is going to be 2 plus -3, which is -1. Your min is -2 minus 3, which is -5, right? So what is your midway? Your midway is just the average of those two, which is -1 plus -5 over 2, which is -6 over 2, which is -3. Okay. And then number 2, your max is, what is your max? Your max is, okay, so this 2x minus 3 does not matter. It's your phase shift, so that doesn't relate to our max. Our max is this, and plus we have a vertical shift, so it's going to be 1 plus 2, which is 3. And then your min is -1 plus 2, which is 1. So your midway is the average of the maximum. So it's 3 plus 1 divided by 2, which is 4 over 2, which is 2. Okay. Okay, so ready to graph. If you know the 7 characteristics, max, min, midway, phase shift, vertical shift, critical values, and period, then you're ready to graph. Remember, a sine graph is a repeating cycle. Okay, so I'm going to stop here. I'm going to start doing an example in another video. I don't want to make these videos too long. So I'm going to stop right here.